let's say thanks for dropping so much awesome science. It's doing it so eloquently. And I also was wondering if you could speak to the nutrition availability of fermentation versus sprouting of beans in particular, and grains.
Sure. Actually, really, I can't. I'll tell you that. I am not a nutritionist. I'm really I'm just like a food-loving, back-to-the-land guy who, I don't know, got obsessed with fermentation, and I've read what I've read, and so I know a certain amount about nutrition, but I couldn't really give you a comparison of nutrient availability from sprouting versus.
That's fine. I just was curious if you had something to say about it. Did you try the mushroom tempeh during the lunch earlier today?
Say again?
Did you try the mushroom tempeh?
Yeah, did you make that?
Yeah, I did.
That was fascinating. So basically what he's doing is he's making a tempeh-like substance. I think it's a little bit problematic to call it tempeh.
It is.
Because tempeh, I also feel like it's problematic to call the kefir that's manufactured in the United States kefir, because they don't use the traditional kefir grains. They're using, a couple of the organisms that someone pulled out of kefir grains, or to call the new kombuchas that are not using the kombucha mothers kombucha. But anyway, I think that was fascinating. What he did was he took corn. It was actually popcorn. I think it would have been better if he popped the corn, actually. But he boiled, cooked it, cooled it down, inoculated it with oyster mushroom spores. And so the oyster mushrooms bound the grains together, similar to the way that Rhizopus oligosporus binds beans together for making tempeh. And it tasted delicious.
Are you in town for a day? Because I'd like to send you off with something a little bit better than that.
Say again?
I'd like to send you off with something better than that if you're in town for a day. It's wild rice with black-eyed peas with lion's mane spawn grown through it. It's a lot better than that. I just think
I just want to say that, all of the traditional ferments, predate recorded history, but it is so exciting to see people who are, creatively recombining things and making up new combinations. I think that there's sort of so much potential for, new ferments, recombinations of things, and I feel really inspired. Some of the directions people are taking kombucha, which is way different than the traditional kombucha. You can make traditional kombucha, and then after the primary fermentation, mix it with some vegetable juice or some fruit juice, and do a secondary fermentation without the SCOBY, and people are making amazing things. And the whole like sodas that people are making using water kefir, which is also known as tibikos. So I just want to encourage experimentation, and it's really exciting to see the new directions people are taking on this stuff.
Hi. Well, I'm really a total novice at this stuff, which is why I got your book today. I did grow up in the Boston area, and I did go to Saturday Market in the early 70s. So, I don't know, maybe you just went into a black hole in the 80s. I don't know. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I've always been sensitive to alcohol, and not really liking the effects that it had for me. Just making me feel tired, and it seemed like I would often get sick afterwards. Anyway, finally, 2 years ago, I found out I had celiac disease. And part of my research efforts, poring over the internet, was I rediscovered kimchi, which I always loved, and so I started making that. And that's actually probably why I'm here tonight, because I mentioned that to someone, and then they told me about a fermentation class, and then they told me about this, so now I'm here. And I'm currently growing a water kefir grain, and I have a Jun mother that I've kind of gone through a few cycles with. But I'm still not sure exactly what I should be doing with them. And I've been drinking the kefir. I started out just drinking it without even doing the second ferment. And now I'm just doing like a tiny second ferment because I don't want to get too much alcohol. but I'm still feeling like I'm getting too tired and sluggish, and I'm wondering if I should do anything different. My goal is nutritional health, digestive health, gut health.
Okay,
I should read the book.
Yeah, you should read the book, but I mean, so here's the thing about, okay, so water kefir, there are these little scobies, there are these little, there's something called water crystals. There are these little crystalline structures that you put in sugar water or other kinds of carbohydrate-rich liquids, and they ferment it. So, some people do water kefir sealed in a jar, some people do it in an open vessel. You'll have much less alcohol accumulation if you do it in an open vessel with air circulation, because anytime alcohol is formed and it's exposed to the air, then acetobacter, which are probably part of that community, but even if they're not, they're certainly in the air. Acetobacter is aerobic. It's a little bit of a paradox, an aerobic ferment, because like for biologists, like the way fermentation is defined is its anaerobic metabolism. Acetic acid bacteria, kombucha, tempeh, a lot of the things we've been talking about actually require oxygen. If you do your water kefir in a vessel that's open, just with a little cloth on top to keep flies out of it, but allow for air circulation, then whatever alcohol might be formed by the yeast that's part of the community will, turn into acetic acid, vinegar. So you'll have much less potential for alcohol accumulation.
I also noticed that it seemed like I need to be a little bit more careful about drinking the jun. I started just kind of drinking it many times, and then I noticed that it just seemed like sometimes my gut was feeling a little funny, and then I went back to this book from the 70s on kombucha that said you actually should start slowly in the morning with a little bit and see how you react, because different people react differently. And someone else I talked to said that she also responded a lot better to kefir than to jun or kombucha. And I'm wondering, is that just have to do with what bacteria is in our gut, or?
I would say, it has to do with more things than that, but just as a general rule, especially with live culture foods, when you're incorporating new bacterial foods into your diet, like it really makes sense to do it in small doses and not go whole hog. And really, like most live fermented foods are foods that people have not historically eaten vast quantities of. They're things that people enjoy small portions of, or small frequent portions of.
And like you also said, maybe the diversity of different types of fermented foods.
Yeah, but in addition to the bacteria, all these fermented foods contain really unique metabolic byproducts, and those might be new compounds for your body to be encountering, and we are not all exactly the same. So it's just good to introduce these things in small doses, and try not to go into like more is better thinking. The little is good, more must be better. Small doses are fine.
One final comment. You say that you're a guy from Tennessee. Maybe you should be known as the guy who planted a jar in Tennessee. Thank you.
I'm just interested in hearing some stories from you. It sounds like you've done
about anything in particular?
Well, reading your book, I can see you have a lot of stories, especially stories of things you've encountered when you've traveled or read. It seems like ferments can tell you so much about a culture that they come from, and there's so much richness in these traditions. And I wonder if you could just entertain us with a couple of kind of bizarre things.
Yeah, sure. Fermentation is practiced everywhere, and it's really exciting for me to see ferments that happen in different places. But I'll tell you that, like, when I first started getting interested in fermentation, which would be about 20 years ago, and it started with sauerkraut. Really it was because I started having a garden, and I was such a naive city kid that it came as a shock that all of the cabbage was ready at the same time. And so, like faced with that reality, I was like, oh, I love sauerkraut. I should figure out how to make sauerkraut. You know how I learned how to make sauerkraut was from the joy of cooking. The 60s edition, not the 90s edition. But anyway, then I started reading everything I could read, and when I got to when I got to investigating wine and beer making, and I started reading the sort of North American hobby literature for beer and wine making, it just, I tried doing some of it. I got some little potassium metabisulfate tablets, and, I got a carboy and an airlock, and I bought some, different yeast varieties, and, I did everything the way they said to do, but it really was confusing for me why it was so, technically difficult. Because I had this travel experience earlier in my life before I specifically got interested in fermentation. A friend and I, after I graduated from college, we went on this backpacking trip in West Africa, and every little village we visited greeted us with an alcoholic beverage that they made. So we had palm wine, millet beer, different kinds of fruit beers, fruit wines, date wine, and it just was confusing to me. How come the books tell me that I need all this high-tech stuff when these little villages clearly didn't have potassium metabisulfate tablets, and they didn't even have carboys, and mostly they were just serving us things out of open ceramic vessels, and it just was a huge paradox. I just couldn't figure it out. And then finally, I encountered this self-published cookbook by an Ethiopian immigrant to the United States, and I was just at a dinner party at a friend of a friend's house. It was really random. I was looking through her cookbooks, and I pulled this little pamphlet out, and the last page of it had a recipe for Ethiopian-style honey wine, and it was 1 part honey, 4 parts water, stir, 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 stir. And, after a couple days, it'll start bubbling. Keep stirring. The bubbling will build in vigor, and after about a week, it'll start to trail off, and then you drink it, and that's the end. So, it just was how can it be that simple? Why is the literature making me think that I need all these special things? So anyway, that has really helped, me commit myself to, low-tech, simple methods. And I really, I have no judgment, on people who sort of use the higher tech methods. I totally get why, sort of some people would think that that's a better way to do it, or a more, get more consistent results that way or something. But I have been just so pleased with the results that I've gotten from, extremely low-tech, simple methods. And, really when I see fermentation around the world, that's the aspect of it that I'm most interested in. Not in the, the ultimate nuanced techniques, but in the sort of the sheer simplicity of it. And, how these foods came to be traditional foods that sort of, made sense for people to do.
Thank you very much. I just love your story about making tempeh in Indonesia.
It just blew my mind. Actually, a couple months ago, I was at this fermentation festival in Petaluma, California, and I met this Indonesian couple that has a tempeh business there. And, the way I've always made tempeh, and the way every North American resource about tempeh making describes it, is you create an incubation chamber, 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and you keep it there. And this Indonesian couple, I asked them, so what's your incubation chamber? And they just laughed. They were like, oh yeah, you Americans think you need a special chamber to do this. And they're like, oh, we just keep it at room temperature. If the temperature outside is less than 68 degrees, we turn on the heat and make the house 68 degrees. But they just do it for 2 days at 72 degrees rather than 1 day at 85 to 90 degrees. So we have reached our time. I'm sorry. I love fielding questions. I wish we could go on for hours and hours. Where am I going to be sitting and signing books? Because out there. I'm going to be out there signing books. I thank you all for coming.